2011, Visit London, the destination management organization that represents the British capital, merged with two other city organizations, Think London and Study London. The new public-private agency, London and Partners, would be responsible for promoting the city to leisure and business travelers, meetings, conventions, and students. It is one of the early examples of an industry-led coalition that was created to optimize resources, strengthen alignment, and increase engagement with local partners and operators in the tourism sector. Today, London and Partners' mission includes supporting international and domestic business growth, attracting international visitation, growing the London brand around the world, and creating partnerships and ventures to foster growth that is resilient, sustainable, and inclusive. Over the past decade, destination entities have been making a gradual shift to stakeholder-based networks, distributed social media marketing, and partner-based destination development. And yes, I say gradual because it hasn't been happening very quickly. That is until the COVID-19 pandemic, which frankly changed everything. Barbara Jamison-Woods is the head of business development for London and Partners. She was with Visit London before the merger, and she's been on deck for the sweeping changes of the last decade. It was an economic recession that spurred the creation of London and Partners, and there is much to be learned from how that crisis parallels, to some extent, what we all need to address as we rebuild from the pandemic. New models of business, new partnerships, and new technologies tempered with a keen awareness of long-standing values is the way forward now, just as it was in 2011 for London and Partners. And that is what Barbara Jamison-Woods is very good at. Good morning, Barbara. How are you? Where are you? I mean, good day. Sorry. Good day, Barbara. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
Good morning. Good afternoon. It's actually the afternoon here in London. So I am in my home in West London. You could say I would like to be in the home that is the background at the moment, Buckingham Palace. But that is not the reality.
Just a very quick question there. Is Buckingham Palace still reportedly drafty, or did they fix that?
I think the draft exclusion is ongoing, the programme, but I'm sure there are some cosy little nooks and crannies within the palace.
Very good. So I want to talk about the creation of London and Partners, and I think there's a really interesting parallel to the current crisis we're in, and a number of the things that you've done over the past decade completely point the way forward for us. So let's go back and talk about London and Partners and where it was created.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned London and Partners was created 10 years ago in 2011, and that was as the result of the economic crisis that everybody was facing. I've actually seen three different changes now because I have been with them for quite some time. And when I first started my job, we were the London Convention Bureau, we were Visit London, very much a tourism delivery agency. Working with, quite a small amount of budget really for a big city like London. We then became Visit London, where we were really transforming ourselves from a government, kind of sort of agency to a destination marketing agency. And like many, many other agencies around the world, we have many visits, Visit Sweden, Visit Stockholm, many, many visits. So it's very much of that time. And then the financial crisis hit, and we are funded by the GLA, which is the Greater London Authority. At the time that I joined, we had a Labour government. It was Ken Livingstone who was our mayor. And then it became a Conservative-led mayor, which is Boris Johnson, who I'm sure many people know now as our Prime Minister. So there was a transition at that time, really, and the governments were looking at, well, who do we give the money to now? What is the most important funding route and program that we need to put in place? And it was a strange situation because for a moment, the tourism sector was almost forgotten. We were almost not included in this new mix of agencies, but thankfully we were. And it was down to the fact that we were able to have a seat at the table. The mayor at the time understood the value of tourism. We had been working with that mayor's office on the bid for the Olympics, which was seen not just as a big event in sport coming to London, but it was very much seen as economic development. It was seen as something we could bring to transform the very poorest.
When you say you were almost excluded from that, tell me a little bit about how you got back to the table and took the seat that you would necessarily need to have if this was going to work. How did you do that?
Yeah, I think it was because we had really, really good communication routes with, at the time, it was the London Development Agency. And they were involved with us in looking at bringing in big, big events that would transform the city, and one of them being the London Olympics. So we were very quick to grab that opportunity and then sit down with the various teams and with government who were looking at a new business model in general for London. We did also have some good contacts with the foreign direct investment teams who were based over in a different office from us. They were over in Canary Wharf City in the east of London. We were over in the west of London. But we did have some good relationships there, and also through our ambassadors in the universities who we were working with when we were bidding to bring, some of these non-for-profit medical association pieces of business to London. We had very, very good connections to people in education, people in our universities. So we had a seat at the table, and then, really, really the conversation started. Everyone realised the importance of creating a new type of destination management organisation that would really reflect what London needed to get back on its feet again after the financial crisis. So we actually merged with two, at that time, it was with two other government funded agencies, one being Think London, and they are responsible for bringing businesses, foreign direct investment into the city and into the wider economy, because we also have a gateway role as the capital to the rest of the UK. And the other was Study London, and they were responsible for bringing in all of the students, all of those overseas students who study in our London universities. And really the link between high growth sectors, between the visitor economy, between looking at the London brand, looking at the different partnerships and relationships that we all had, it was decided that we would all move in together into one office and there would be one funding stream.
So you're at the crux of this though in 2011, and you've said you literally looked to a new way to manage destinations. And it's interesting because in 2011 we weren't really using the term destination management organizations or community shared values. So it's interesting as we look back and we see the things that were the harbingers of how we're structuring our business today. But as you sat down at that broad table for those first few months, was there an aha moment in there for you as a group when you knew you were on the right path?
Yes, because I think what came out of it, many other people in different teams could actually see the value of a business event beyond just bringing in people to stay in our hotels. They were really aware of the legacy of these business events in terms of, you have research and development experts from a major corporation, coming to London. Then there's the opportunity for us to introduce them to seed funders, to funding programs, to make them stay, to make them set up their business in London. We saw from our students, they wanted to stay in London, and they would be, the people driving growth in many, many of our sectors in the future. And we wanted to enable them to stay. And then their friends, their family would be tourism visitors of the future. So I think what really struck everybody is, why hadn't we been speaking to each other,
Right.
years ago?
Right.
Why did it take this financial crisis to get us really, really working together with a common goal and, a common purpose?
So London and Partners has done a great job of creating guiding principles that balance the needs of the traveler, the desires of the traveler, with sustainable economic development at home. It's 2021. You're 10 years into this now, and I understand you just released your newest strategy.
Yes, that's right. And again, it's good timing because we've just had our election, and Sadiq Khan has been re-elected as the Mayor of London, and this was a strategy that we were working on with his office. Our chairman is actually one of the deputy mayors of business for London, so it's good timing that we can now kind of carry on with this strategy. And the strategy obviously has been hugely affected, again, because of the crisis that everyone is facing now with the pandemic. So what we thought our strategy was going to be a couple of years ago when we started the planning has now, turned into something which is different. And I think what we realised is that London is not a brand that we own. Yes, we can do marketing, we can sing London's praises, we can go around the world, we have overseas offices, we can bring events to London, but it's something that we can help amplify, and it's something that we can maintain. And what we've had to do, lots of businesses have been financially hit. There isn't as much money to go around after the year that everybody has had. So the whole idea of the partners in our name, London and Partners, has become hugely important for us. And we create partnerships and profit-making ventures to scale our impact. We're really now looking at growing London's global reputation to support economic growth. And
I find it fascinating that in there you preface that with, we don't own the London brand. We don't control it. And I think that's a really interesting interjection that you saw necessary to put in there. I had a discussion with a person I think Michael Nagy, the director of sales at the Fairmont Copacabana. He's very active internationally. He said just something remarkable about a month and a half ago. He said the Fairmont turned a corner last summer when it decided to stop owning its own content.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree, because I think everybody's learned that they can't control everything. That there's no point talking at people about something. It's now much more about finding out what does your audience want and how can we help deliver what they really, really need. Everything now has become so much more customized, and we really need to think with a short-term goal, medium-term goals and long-term goals, but that could easily change within a second. We don't know. London's on the right track at the moment with the vaccination programme. Next week, we're opening up. We're hugely excited. We've just launched a new campaign, Let's Do London, really looking at our domestic market and then our nearby European markets. And then as the routes open up.
Do you have a projection trajectory for recovery here in Canada? In the early 1980s SARS crisis, we had a respiratory pandemic, and we figure it took our international inbound, depending on who you talk to, between 5 and 9 years to recover. So heavy focus on domestic, rebuilding tourism operations by funneling domestic traffic through, obviously, domestic suppliers. What do you see as your trajectory on this one?
Yes, I think London is a slightly different case anyway with domestic tourism, because when you look at London, it's 33 different boroughs. It takes, by the time you get home from central London to one of the suburbs or to one of the boroughs, we did a piece of research showing that most Londoners will only go out in the evening, probably within 3 miles from where they live. So for us, it's always been a challenge getting Londoners to come into central London. So we're really stepping up that activity now, and also looking at other parts of the UK to really make it as easy as possible for them to stay longer in London. We're working with our museums and our galleries, to do evening visits, nighttime visits. We're working with the transportation providers to give them affordable, easy options to get in and out of the city. And I think our role is really a catalyst to work with our partners and work with the industry to ensure that it's quick, it's as quick as possible. We did a number of activations when we opened before we had to close again. Eat Out to Help Out. That was a government-funded scheme to help people, give them an affordable option to go to a restaurant. So I think now it's much more about affordability, and it's about enabling people to come into London and experience things that maybe they wouldn't see, and look at London in a different way, and look at London in a way that they might look at an overseas destination. So we have our challenges as well. If you look at the retail sector, places like Oxford Street, Bond Street, Regent Street, some of those retail outlets have closed down. So we have a whole team now looking at repurposing some of those buildings and putting in activations that are relevant for all age groups to come and explore the city in a tech way, in a different way.
Barbara, I think it's fantastic. Here we are. London and Partners obviously has a huge focus on international business travel and staging magnificent events that leave legacy value assets. But in the pandemic, you don't miss a beat, and you're talking about the kind of direct involvement and relief, but involvement as well with operators that help maintain the sustainability of the network that is London. And I think it's really commendable. You sort of don't bat an eyelash as you say it, but you really have, I'm going to use that word we all hate from the pandemic, pivoted hard, and are doing what it takes to get to the next step.
Yes, yeah, I was going to mention the word pivot, and I know what you mean about that word, but it's true. We had to act very, very quickly, not only externally, but also internally within our company. And I think it's something else that we've done. We've now provided an open access, free of charge tourism membership to equip the tourism sector with insights, with data and training to help them grow their business in London's economy. We are a public-private funded organisation. We have the grant funding, we have paying partners, but there are other partners out there that just have not got the budget. So we're looking at different campaigns where we can be more inclusive, and how we can grow the audiences and revenue on Visit London's digital channels. So we've changed, we have pivoted in the right way. And I do believe, I think when we were talking about when we first started, with the financial crisis, I do believe that you go along in the direction according to what is right for the city at that time. And London's tech sector actually in 2011 was really growing. But that was because the universities were teaching the right courses. We had the right type of students that wanted to stay, work in that industry. We had the right government who saw that they should be giving tax breaks to the right type of companies. And I think we as a DMO can only grow if others around us are all working together in a strategic way. But we can only shape the future of the city according to what's right for the time. So
Barbara,
really,
I very much like that articulation, and I would read it back to you as you can do anything in tourism destination management as long as the network of stakeholders that's engaged supports that idea, and you spend a lot of time moving in that direction. I want to change gears here because there's something that you love to talk about that I found fascinating. While London and Partners has pivoted and is doing great domestic work and has a short, mid, and long-term plan on recovery, you're still charged with building out London's reputation as a global central hub for meetings, association meetings, conventions, etc. And you talked to me before about learning a lot, not just in the pandemic, but the year before it, about the changing nature of meetings. And since you're London's Partners, I do want to talk to you about meetings before we run out of time. So tell me about your journey into meetings, hybrid meetings, and what you've learned along the way, because I think it's really fascinating and we should share it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I've worked on the client side in past jobs and also on the supplier side. And if we look at the way delegates have attended meetings, it's changed. Years ago, people were just happy to come along, go to a big congress centre, convention centre, sit there, listen to some keynote speakers, coffee breaks, etc. We then really saw with the younger audiences coming on board and technology again enabled them to really cherry pick which sessions they wanted to go to, which speakers they wanted to meet or network with or listen to. So we really saw that shift quite a few years ago away from coming over one place, one destination, one convention centre, 3 days and then out again. It was much more about they wanted to use the time wisely. Their companies were saying to them, okay, you can go to London, but while you're there, you need to be meeting with this company or you should be doing this. So it was about using their time wisely, wanting to make the most out of their visit and not necessarily just sit in a chair for 3 days. So we worked ourselves actually to create our own type of cross-city activation, which was London Technology Week.
So is this what you've called in parenthesis to me before, the DMO as matchmaker?
Yes, I would say that we moved from a marketing organisation, Marketing London, and what we mustn't forget is that governments, they're normally in power for 3-year, 4-year terms. We found that we were on track with the government at that particular time, and they understood that it was very, very important to work with all of the boroughs in London. And it was important for us not just to bring visitors to a meeting in one particular place, but we could really enable, people in other boroughs to benefit from these activations. So what we decided to do was not sell London on where is Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, but also market London as to where all of our sector clusters were. So if you've got creatives coming into London or you've got people working in gaming, there are some fabulous locations in and around, Soho, Central London, King's Cross, etc. If it was the techie people, you've got Google Campus in Shoreditch, that's where they want to be. And as we were really, really aligned to our foreign direct investment teams, we had access to all of these London business networks. So what we were really looking at is shaping the event so that lots of people within London could benefit from that particular event.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because in a traditional destination marketing model from 2010, 2011, a heavy focus on marketing, stakeholder engagement is basically a membership proposition. Your organization looks very different today. If you were talking to our peers and saying, here's how we became a DMO matchmaker, an enabling body, we've talked about it at a very high level, at the management level, the strategy shift and how you got together with other leaders. But at an executional level then, for London and Partners to actually play matchmaker, what's the kind of line, role, and function that you have in your mid-level managers? You must have people who spend their time thinking about engaging and solving problems for businesses.
Yes, yeah, we are. I would say we're an enabler. We are a matchmaker because, as we know, in the business event sector, it is about relationships, and business growth is about trust. And I think where we really saw things progress is that we became known for London Technology Week. We were able to say that this event generated so many jobs, it generated so much investment, and it was our company leading it. And we were collaborating with an event organizer and with the various venues and the partners. But then our deputy mayor around that time then became the chairman of London and Partners. So all of the teams, within the City of London, which is the financial sector, the teams within the GLA, whether they were looking at urban development or the creative industry or the arts, they really realised that we were able to work together through a business event strategy to create business legacies and to create new businesses and to create growth.
So what's the
something
job?
like, yeah.
What's the job that exists in 2021 that didn't exist in 2011 on your frontline staff?
So I would say it's the relationship building. It's creativity. I think it's creative energy. I think it's thinking about something new, not just delivering something that's on your remit, but it's about doing innovative things. We've brought Silicon Valley comes to the UK. We've worked on that type of program. We've worked on women in technology. We aligned London Technology Week with the Founders Forum, so you've got the founders of all the biggies, that will be in London at that time. They were happy to have their own meeting. It was carrying on, which was outside of London, but it's really looking at it from a more strategic point of view. We've now increased our offices overseas. So we have 2 offices in India. We have 3 offices in China. We have offices throughout Canada, or in Canada and the States, and we've increased our office space in Europe. So I think having those people out there in market also is something that has really changed for us and changed the type of people that we're employing.
So certainly I get the sense that London and Partners is not a sell a destination type of CVB. Are we having discussions now with our partners around the world saying, hey, come to London, here's what's in it for you, and we're going to articulate here's what's in it for us, because that's how we build sustainability? Are those conversations now happening at the boardroom level?
Yes, and I think you've just said the word, because the word that is driving everything for everybody at the moment, whether you're a destination or a client or a provider, is sustainability, because it's the wider agenda, world agenda that we're focusing on. And so now the collaboration between London and European cities is very, very important as far as I'm concerned, because what everyone is looking, and everyone, from ICA or IAPCO, a lot of our trade bodies, they're all talking about having event industry and event hubs to really cut back on the carbon footprint. So it's very important for London to be seen as a global city and hybrid hub, because through technology, through the pandemic, everyone's learned they can reach global audiences from their living room, which they need to be doing because they need to be growing their markets.
Well, you and I've talked about this. We've talked about this, and you made a really great point, which was it's not simply throwing a meeting up on in a VR sort of setting with some people in a room and some people on computers. We have to get really good at this, don't we? Like really good at it. We're competing with television and other forms of very, very short form media. This is we've yet to necessarily nail this, but you guys are well at work on it. Tell me a little bit about your newest installation, the virtual meeting space.
Yes, so we really think if London's going to do technology, London needs to do it well. And I know that everyone has glitches. And I think the great thing about the pandemic is that everyone has been much more accepting of that. I think everyone has seen the human side of each other. And I think that is a really lovely thing. And it's certainly something, I think that human aspect actually is something we've developed much more within our own company with some of the academies, etc., that we've set up in London and Partners. On the technology side, we have some of the most fantastic technology providers and innovators in London. So one of our partners, a company called White Light, they've been going for many, many years. They work with some of our big entertainment providers, the arts, culture, and a lot of our great venues. And they've created the Smart Stage, which I think is really leading technology, and it enables you to have a very good level of communication with your audience, and I think it just positions London in the right way.
Can you describe the Smart Stage for us? Can you describe it for us?
The Smart Stage, the technology that they have, you can teleport people in very easily. It looks as if they're on the stage, but you can use easy to use programs like Teams, like Zoom. So you can kind of track people, when they're in the room with you. It really looks as if you're all together, and you can have wonderful, as far as we're concerned, destination backgrounds, and a lot of the technology to bring that destination into the event, which a lot of my colleagues, because I'm very involved with DI, as you know, but also with European cities marketing, everyone, all the cities are talking about how can you bring a destination into a virtual event. And I think this whole idea of having a hub where you're collaborating, say, a big company might want to have a Northern European hub hybrid event where you have your locals that could get there by train. So for me, in London, that would be working with people like Eurostar, Flanders Tourism, Paris, Brussels, 2 hours away. But London could be the global hub. So we could have a hybrid audience, which is controlled with the venue, but then the global audience using really good technology that really works in a good way. So the event comes across in a professional way for London.
Let's say, Barbara, we're getting low on time, but I want to float this one. I mean, in the world where hybridized meetings will become more and more normalized, and they make a lot of sense for so many reasons, not the least of which is carbon footprint, pandemic, restrictions, etc. We're now in a place where one of the benefits of conventions and visiting was you got to see Cannes, you got to see Imola, you got to see Chicago. We're all about to experience destinations more and more in a virtual way. And there's a saying, someone said to me a long time ago, we reached the point a decade ago where more people would visit your destination virtually than will ever come in person. So it just spurs in my mind this idea of London as content. And you said this is where we started this conversation. We're as destination organizations, we're moving into the world where we have to start looking at our content, because rather than the person showing up and being wowed by London, they have to join the event and be wowed by London. And we've got a lot of work to do there, don't we?
Yes, and I think the content is key, because with this pandemic, people are looking at where they're spending their money, and as I mentioned before, they have to get return on investment now. But we did a study a little while ago into event planners and organisers and people in general, and we were looking at how people think with the right-hand side of the brain or the left-hand side of the brain. Right hand is, the meeting room has to be so many square meters, square feet, the lighting has to be great at hotels, etc. The left-hand side of the brain is the emotional feeling that you get from being at that venue, from hearing to that speaker, from meeting somebody during the coffee break that really inspires you. And a virtual event, yes, you can network in great ways using great technology, but there's nothing that can replace the thing that just happens, and London is about that. It's about bumping into somebody after work, going for a drink in a pub, and then reinventing the world, and it's that kind of emotion about going to see a theatre production, seeing the culture. And I think culture plays a big part in people's lives. So you can replicate that virtually, but I think you need to use the technology for what it is.
Yep.
For reach, to get to wider audiences, on demand, if people are short of time, for them to really use their time wisely and get the content that they want. And I think the collaboration between cities, say with a hybrid event or a cluster event, is very important, because then you can get the best person in that particular subject from Copenhagen, you can get the best person from Barcelona, the best person from London together, and they are providing the content.
Absolutely.
I think that is kind of the enabler, and that's where people's mind shift has kind of shifted.
But for the authentic Brussels to come through, or the authentic Helsinki or London, we need the other people too. You and I were both at the ECM conference, I think about 3-4 weeks ago, and there's some brilliant stuff from Helsinki on it started with Helsinki in a blocks, and then it became Helsinki Freedom. Lifestyle vignettes that I would not opposed to see in any meeting setting. If they showed me, your events in Helsinki, and they showed me real people talking about the place, it was incredibly moving.
Yes, yeah, and I think it is that emotional side of things that people really realize now is so meaningful, and that I think does drive change in organizations. It's being motivated by something that somebody's seen or they've heard or they've experienced, no matter what country it is. But I think coming back to sustainability, everyone now is focusing on, well, I think people have taken a step back. I think what the pandemic has done, it's made people slow down and really rethink. And that's why you started, David, in the beginning saying that many of these cities now are looking at their own models because of the pandemic. But they're also thinking, well, what type of tourist do I want? What type of visitor do I want? And we certainly in London are focusing on the longer term visitor. We're focusing on somebody that will come back as a repeat visitor, or they'll come back and they might work in London. They might invest in London. And I think the collaboration with the other cities is key, because if they're going to come to Europe, if the flights are they're not allowed to take so many long haul flights, then, make the most of your trip while you're here, extend the trip, make it longer. So people are adjusting, I think, the products that they're offering and the way they're selling their cities. But collaboration, I think, has replaced competition. And I think that is a very welcome trend that we're looking at between cities.
Well, I'll tell you what, we started this interview talking about collaboration. A decade ago, London and Partners was formed out of the unusual step of putting together all the pieces on the Rubik's Cube. You've been a champion of collaboration. I want to thank you for your personal work at the board level, at ECM, at Destinations International, on the international committee, with our friends, people like Brad Dean. Great work, Barbara. Really
Thanks.
great to have you here. I think there's a lot of lessons in there for all of us. Are there any last words to your peers before we call it a day?
I think we are, and without sounding corny, I think our industry, it is like a family. I think we all get it. We all support each other. I think this last year, I think we've become a lot more patient with each other, more understanding. I think hotels, are adapting, they're bending over backwards with their terms and conditions to help clients. And I think we should continue to work in that way. I think we're an excellent industry. I mean, when I look at the work that DI and ECM do on the mentorship programs that they're running, the educational programs that they're running, for a lot of these young people in our industry who have maybe just graduated, or they've just got their first career in the meeting and events industry, they haven't had the chance to go and meet their peers. They haven't had the chance to go and sit in on an educational session. So I think continuing that work of collaboration, of education, and really adapting and pivoting.
Pivoting.
Yeah, I think that's the way forward.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's always a great pleasure to chat with you. Have a great evening.
And thank you very much, David, for the opportunity. Thanks.